Richard Dickey, member of the United States Marine Corps from 1994 to 2001.
Why did you join the military?
Well, my dad was a member of the military growing up. Not growing up, before I was born, he was a member of the military, but so it had been part of my family. It's just one of those things where I kind of felt a patriotism and wanted to do something as far as to serve my country, so I decided to join the military.
Where were you stationed?
I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps upon graduation from Marquette University in '94. I had to wait a little bit before I went to my initial training, which was in Quantico, Virginia. I spent 6 months there where I was selected to be an artillery officer. So then I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and spent 6 months there on the artillery officer basic course. And then went out to California, Camp Pendleton, and spent 3 years there with the artillery, including a 6-month Westpac deployment that took us over into Kuwait. We spent 30 days ashore training in Kuwait, and then came back. And then after that, I did a 3-year tour in Lansing, Michigan, recruiting college students to become officers in the Marine Corps.
Any stories that really impacted you any way?
I don't know, I guess the whole thing as far as, being in the Marine Corps, one of those things was the Westpac deployment. We boarded ships in California, crossed the ocean, like I said, did 30 days of training in Kuwait. That would have been in 1998. And at that time, when we got back on the ships after our training ashore in Kuwait, Saddam Hussein was doing some of his saber rattling type proclamations and things like that. So we spent some added time in the Gulf, basically as a security watch until the other group was ready to come back and replace us in the Gulf. And then, on the way back to the States, that we were already past the point of coming back. It was easier to let them go and take our place.
So did you meet anyone that impacted you?
I can't say anything in particular. I had a few, I guess, I had a couple battery COs, battalion COs that have impacted the way, kind of from a leadership standpoint, and influencing others and things like that along the way.
How did you feel when you came home?
I guess when I came home from the Westpac deployment, at that point in time, it was a little bit different atmosphere. There was a lot of patriotism in the country still at that point in time. So there was no negativity towards us. I was proud to serve my country. At one point in time, I had thought about making it a career. So there was no negativity about it.
Was your life changed by your experience?
Most definitely. I guess I grew up in Nebraska, went to college, and now I guess, from one of those things, My 3 children were born in 3 different cities in 2 different states. I've moved around since then and after that. So there's a lot of experience in meeting different people and living in different areas that I wouldn't have done had I not joined the military.
Did your service influence your career later in life?
I guess somewhat. I mean, artillery is a very heavy equipment oriented field in the military. And I did spend some time as the motor transport officer when I was with the battery. And that kind of led me into getting into the transportation and the civilian side. And then later getting into actually now being in the maintenance side of equipment and things like that. So it has influenced me that way. Additionally, as an officer with the training that I received, I'm able to get out of the military and be a manager on the civilian side.
So it was like the artillery sound. Did you have any earmuffs or anything?
Most people will wear earplugs. From that standpoint, you know when it's going to go off, so it's kind of helpful from that standpoint. It's not usually a surprise, depending on where you're at and what you're doing. There's different jobs within the artillery. As a forward observer, you go out and you are with an infantry unit and you observe rounds, and that's how you direct the rounds onto the target. So obviously you wouldn't be anywhere near the noise at that point in time. And then I did that for a few months, moved up to be the assistant executive officer. There's some different stuff you do with some survey and that, but once again, you're not necessarily right up against the gun line. But part of that being the platoon commander for the gun line, when you go up there, you're around the guns. The people that are around the guns all the time wear earplugs, or depending on what they're doing, there's a recorder that wore headphones that helped from that standpoint. But and then I moved on, I guess, to be the fire direction officer. Once again, the way an artillery position set up, there's no need for earplugs in all the locations. And then I also did some time as executive officer of the battery.
Like any stressful stories with like transporting these things?
There's quite a few things like that happening. We've one of the first times I ever went to Camp Helens, and we did a lot of training up at 29 Palms, out in the desert, out in California, like nicknamed the Marine Corps Sandbox. But go up there and did a lot of training. One of the first times you go up there, because you drive around in blackout conditions, where had a trailer being towed by a truck, and it hit a hole just right that it flipped over on top of itself on the pintle hitch. So that's had to get it unloaded and flip back over, and so things like that. A lot of moving around in the desert, even in Kuwait, when you're, like I said, driving around in blackout conditions. We train the way we fight. So we go around in blackout conditions and move, and sometimes in that dark of night, roads do not, there's not signs to tell you where to turn. There's not clear markings on where the roads are, if there are even roads. So from that standpoint, as the assistant executive officer, we used to go out and find, the CO would go out and find an area where we're going to go move to next. And then as an assistant executive officer, we'd go up and meet them, and we'd put into, without getting real technical about it, putting the battery in place to be able to fire. And if you got to get all the battery guns lined up on the same azimuth. So if you've got 6 guns firing, they've got to be pointed similarly in the right direction, because when you give them directions to fire, if they're not pointed similarly in the same direction, the rounds aren't going to go where you want them to go. At the time, as a fire direction officer, you get a nice big old, it was probably 6 foot long box that the fire direction computer was housed in. We had generators that went with us to run that computer. Like I said, each battery or each gun would get separate firing data. So if I'm out there as a fire direction officer and I want to shoot the round in a certain position, this gun's not going to shoot the same direction as this one, depending on how you're going to fire for you. So calculating that data, we also did backup with manual calculations on the side. So, and then I guess, so every time you move, you're going to move, we had 5 tons that pulled the howitzers. We had Humvees for the fire direction center, the XO. We had a communications group with the battery. And with all that, anytime you go to move, it's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of moving vehicles. And like I said, especially at night when you're trying to move, you get in some stressful situations doing that.
So, what was your training like? Was it really difficult, or was it kind of easy for you?
Well, there are different stages of the training. I guess I originally went to officer candidate school. Would have been the summer between my junior and sophomore year of college. The first 6 weeks was pretty difficult. And then went back for the second 6 weeks of my officer candidate school training. A little bit more knowing what to expect at that point in time. And that was between my junior and senior year. So with that, it was the second time around was a little easier. It was more advanced training and more fast paced, but knowing what to expect and things along those lines. The officer training is a little bit different than the enlisted side.
Why did you choose to join in the Marines?
Once again, goes back to my dad was a Marine. I wanted to be in the Marine Corps. I guess for a while, off and on, I'd thrown it around from the time I was little until I actually joined. So that was kind of from that standpoint. That led to the choice of being a Marine, and that's what I wanted to do.